Today's webinar provides a brief summary of key changes that are incorporated into Weatherization Program Notice 19-4, primarily relating to energy audit submissions and approvals, as well as other energy audit-related issues. Grantees of the Weatherization Assistance Program should review this webinar in conjunction with the written guidance prior to submitting energy audit renewals. WPN 19-4 consists of two parts: the official written guidance and a bundled attachment with a total of 9 separate parts. This WPN and its attachments replace WPNs 16-8, 16-7, and supersedes WPN 10-16 and WAP Memo 11. For the full version of this newly updated WPN and its attachments, please visit DOE's EERE website. Let's begin by discussing a few of the major changes that you'll notice in WPN 19-4. The first one involves the maintenance of software audit tools. DOE, from this point forward, will issue findings for any audit tools that are not fully in compliance with regulation. This includes, but is not limited to, the timeliness of updates, known software issues that adversely affect energy savings estimates, and expired audit approvals. What this means for grantees: if you're using a software audit tool that requires an update or issue is identified that is creating energy savings estimates that are inaccurate or fall out of compliance with regulation, you're going to have 60 days to correct those. Any known software bugs that are identified by the developer, they will have 30 days to correct those. Obviously, if your audit approval is expired, then you're no longer in compliance with regulation, and therefore a finding will be issued. It is DOE's recommendation to all grantees that you submit an audit reapprovals a minimum of 6 months in advance of your expiration date. This will give DOE sufficient time to review your submissions, get any corrections made, and issue you an approval that will maintain compliance with regulation. So please take the opportunity to talk with your project officer if you have an upcoming renewal and ensure that you're getting things together in a timely manner for that renewal so as to avoid non-compliance. Other major changes that we'll discuss include updated lists of expedited and standard energy audit tools, as well as the incorporation of WAP funds for renewable energy systems. Continuing with major changes that you'll notice in this WPN, there's a clarification on measure skipping. Essentially, we're not going to be allowed to skip major measures in the future. This we'll discuss a little bit more in a moment. Also, energy conservation measure lifetimes have been clarified. There was some variability in lifetimes throughout the network, so this WPN solidifies those and extends a few of those. Also, there is the addition of a derating formula for refrigerant cycled heating cooling systems, which we will discuss a bit more detail in just a moment. This list contains what DOE is now referring to as expedited energy audit tools. These audit tools have reduced requirements for submission and are not going to require as rigorous of a review as other tools that are not on this list. Any tool on this list, DOE is committed to a 30-day review on the initial review process so that we can expedite these. However, there is no guarantee if these will be approved or accepted within a 30-day window. DOE just has the goal of ensuring that in the first 30 days after a submission, that you will receive a response with either an approval or additional items that are needed to finalize an approval for these tools. Most of these you're familiar with. Some are multifamily only. Some cannot be used on mobile homes. So if you're considering switching from the tool you're currently using, be aware that this list will have the fastest turnaround time on reviews. However, if you have an alternative tool that you would like to use, then please contact your project officer about the submission process for that. This WPN also includes an updated list of standard energy audit tools as well as a complete list for what you will need to submit for an approval for either an expedited or a standard audit tool. This is the list of standard energy audit tools that have been previously approved by DOE for use in specific states. Many of these are tailored specifically to the state in which they're approved for, and if you would like to use any of these tools, you should be sure that it can be tailored to your climate zone specifically. If you have any questions about any of these tools or would like to get more information about any of them, please reach out to your project officer and they can point you in the right direction. Or you can talk to these individual grantees who are already using these tools to determine if they may be appropriate for your housing stock. WPN 19-4 includes a few clarifications about the use of WAP funding for renewable energy systems. Specifically, this refers to photovoltaic systems. It specifies the allowable program year 2019 adjusted average of $3,699 per unit for these renewables. It also refers to the enabling regulations that specify performance and quality standards criteria for these systems. For additional guidance, you will want to look to WAP Memorandum 24 for this step-by-step guidance on how to get this approved. Just a brief summary of that, you will have to make a request specifically to the project officer for the project you're considering. You will have to provide a sample analysis that includes the solar PV as a measure included in the energy modeling. We'll also have to go through a NEPA, or National Environmental Policy Act impact assessment. Your PO will assist you with that. And then you'll have to develop a solar pilot program for your state. We know that renewable energy systems are not cost effective everywhere, and there are various subsidies and other things from states and localities that will factor into these. So if you're considering the addition of renewable energy systems to your audit, you certainly will want to start the conversation with your project officer, but it will require a number of items to be completed prior to approval for a single project. And certainly if you wish to add it as a part of your program to all potential weatherization projects, then certainly it will be a lot of additional pieces to be developed for implementation of that. So 19-4 does provide a few clarifications, but WAP Memo 24 is still the primary piece of guidance that you'll need to look for about how to get that incorporated. Attachment 8 of this WPN includes a clarification on measure skipping. First, it defines measure skipping. It clarifies that skipping any measure that is on the approved priority list or produced by the approved audit tool must be installed. Skipping any of those measures would be defined as measure skipping. So installing a measure further down the list in priority without installing one above it would be measure skipping. It also defines major measures, specifically air sealing, duct sealing of ducts outside the thermal envelope, attic, wall, and floor or belly insulation are all included in the major measures definition. Skipping of a cost-justified major measure, a measure from that list, is not permitted at any time. However, there are some circumstances where a measure may have to be removed from the work order in certain circumstances. One of those circumstances is if funding is limited. If there is not sufficient funding to complete the entire work scope produced by the audit tool or the priority list, then measures may be removed from the bottom of the work scope or the least cost-effective measure and work your way up. This does not include any of the major measures. If it's a major measure, then it cannot be removed from the work order. Additionally, any health and safety measures or incidental repair measures that are attached to a major measure may not be removed from the work scope. Another circumstance that arises occasionally is that the client is uncomfortable with a planned measure. So prior to beginning work, the client declines a measure. Every effort should be made to educate the client, to find an alternative material perhaps that will allow the measure to still be installed. However, if the client still continues to decline a measure, then the decision must be made whether or not that is a major measure or if it is a measure that does not fall into that category. If it's a major measure, then the job must be deferred. If it is not a major measure, then the auditor can provide sufficient documentation and justification for why that measure needs to be skipped, and provided that that is included in the client file, a measure skipping of a non-major measure may be allowed. If the work has already begun, perhaps you've, just due to the nature of the work process, have installed a measure on the list that is further down in priority than some of the major measures, and then a client declines one of those major measures. At that point, the client should be educated as to why we don't want to skip these major measures. If they still continue to decline a measure, then the job must be stopped at that point. Any installed measures should be inspected by the QCI and finalized, and that job will be reported as a completion to DOE at that point. However, no other measures will be installed after the client refuses a major measure. Additionally, DOE wants to be sure that grantees understand that an improperly or untrained subgrantee is not an allowable reason to skip a measure. So if additional training is needed, then the home which will be affected by the lack of training should be deferred or postponed until the subgrantee or contractor is properly trained to conduct the measure in accordance with the standard work specifications and DOE's regulations. So take a look at Attachment 8. Be sure that you understand it. If you have any questions about it, please refer those to your project officer. But just be aware that measure skipping will not be allowed for the majority of measures in the work scope. The attachments to this WPN include a clarification about the life expectancy or lifetimes to be used in the audit tool for energy conservation measures. That's detailed in Attachment 9. Of note, some allowable maximum lifetimes of attic, wall, floor, and certain types of knee wall insulation have been extended to a 30-year maximum. This is a change from the 20-year maximum previously included in the default databases. Additionally, fuel-fired furnaces and boilers, both standard and condensing variety, have now been extended to 20-year maximum. So this means any fossil fuel furnaces, natural gas, propane, or oil are in this category of 20 years. If a grantee wishes to adopt the new maximum measure lifetimes, they must obtain DOE approval prior to doing so. And the submittal requirements for that approval are included in Attachment 9. Attachment 9 also includes a table labeled 9.2 that specifies maximum allowable lifetimes for all energy conservation measures. Any audit tool that may currently be using lifetimes that are longer than those listed in 9.2 will have to revert back to the default contained in Table 9.2. If a grantee would like to extend the measure lifetimes beyond those listed in Table 9.2, they will have to submit a request to their project officer and provide sufficient documentation for DOE to evaluate their request. Keep in mind, DOE will not approve any requests that extend lifetimes beyond a 30-year maximum. This is due to the fact that the EIA does not forecast fuel pricing beyond 30 years. This WPN also contains a new D-rating formula to be used for some heating and cooling systems. This formula only applies to heating cooling systems such as air conditioners and heat pumps that use a refrigerant cycle for production of heating or cooling. Combustion appliances are not covered under this D-rating formula. The WPN provides the formula that is based on an age of the unit and the efficiency as it was originally installed. So please review that formula. If you have any questions, direct those to your project officer. The reason for doing this is because air conditioners and heat pumps cannot accurately be measured for efficiency while on site by most auditors. So there was a need for a means of derating old systems that just are not performing as originally designed. Any other variation of this process or another formula that may currently be used by a grantee will no longer be allowed unless first approved in writing by the Department of Energy. So if you are using a formula that is not the same as the formula contained in this WPN, then please submit that to your project officer for approval. But for the most part, this will be the formula the DOE will permit for any grantee to use. Remember that derating of a combustion appliance in lieu of testing is not allowed. So if it's a combustion appliance, you still must test it for efficiency and use those efficiencies in the calculations in the energy audit tool. So we've discussed a number of new items that are included in this WPN, but let's go back and reiterate a few things that are not new, that were contained in the previous WPNs, but have been included in this WPN as reminders about how to maintain compliance. The first of these relates to multifamily energy audit approvals. Any grantee with an energy audit approval for multifamily housing stock should know that that approval is conditional. Condition is based on ongoing competence of the grantee to review and monitor audits and work. What this means is if you have a multifamily audit tool that is approved for use in your state, then the grantee must maintain within the network the capacity to appropriately audit and run software audits on this type of building stock, and they must maintain the competence at the state level to monitor these projects and ensure ongoing compliance with all of DOE's regulations and the audit tool approval. DOE will verify this competence during monitoring. So this means a drop in staffing or a loss of knowledge in the subgrantee network or at the grantee could result in the multifamily audit approval being revoked and the state having to go back to a case-by-case approval by DOE. So keep that in mind if you have a multifamily audit approval currently in place. The next of these reminders is in regards to web-based energy audit tools. It is required that DOE have access to the live version or production sites where these web-based audit tools are being used for the purpose of monitoring these for appropriateness of updates as well as issues that may arise from bugs or similar problems. DOE has previously required this access, but now is making sure that all the states that are using web-based energy audit tools are aware of it and to notify them that they will be continuing monitoring those in the coming year. The next reminder is in regards to compliance with 2 CFR 200. 2 CFR 200 requires that contract costs be evaluated each contract cycle. What that means is that at least annually, the grantee needs to evaluate the costs used in priority list and audit cost libraries. They'll need to verify that the fuel costs have not risen or dropped significantly, that the measure implementation costs are still reasonable and are accurate for what is being installed. And additionally, if there are technology advancement, best weatherization practices, etc., that need to be added to the library or that will change costs or evaluation practices for libraries and priority lists, these need to be evaluated, and if changes are necessary, you will need to notify DOE of those changes. Another reminder, an item that's not new, it was in the previous WPNs but has been reiterated in this WPN, is the process for review of audit procedure submittals. So if you submit, whether it's a reapproval or a new request for approval to the Department of Energy for a new energy audit tool, DOE will evaluate not only whether or not the software will work appropriately, but also your network's ability to use that software tool competently. Beyond just the software tool competency, they will also look at field data collection procedures and your written guidance for all audit-related activities. That includes ASHRAE, the field data collection process, diagnostic inspections in the field, an audit tool user's manual as well will be something that the Department of Energy will be looking for in this review. So be sure that you understand that the audit procedure submittal is not just the software, but involves all aspects of the energy audit process to assure that all grantees are operating within the bounds of DOE guidance for the full energy audit process. The last item in this WPN that we'd like to discuss is a reminder to grantees that all weatherization materials must comply with Appendix A contained in 10 CFR 440. There has been some confusion about what is allowed or not allowed under this appendix, and so this WPN clarifies that. It includes in Attachment 7 an official copy of Appendix A for all ECM materials that are allowed. If you're installing an energy conservation material that is not included in this appendix, then you will need to request permission to use that material from DOE. To do that, in Attachment 6, there's a special form has been produced to make it simpler for grantees to apply for a special approval of a non-Appendix A energy conservation material. So keep in mind that Attachment 7 contains all approved materials, and if they're not on that list but you'd like to install it, you can make a request of DOE to add that to your program. You can make that request one time, have it added to your program, and for the future, when you come back for audit renewals, that will be included in your audit renewal. Also keep in mind that the Appendix A does not apply to materials installed as incidental repairs or as health and safety measures, nor does it apply to general heat waste items. This is a list of some non-Appendix A ECMs that are currently approved for some grantees. Let me reiterate, this list applies only to the specific grantees who have requested addition of these items into their program as part of either their audit request or part of a special materials approval request previously done per WPN 16-7, but now you will use Attachment 6 of WPN 19-4 to apply for these. So remember, if this is not already in your program, you will have to request it specifically through your project officer. This is not a blanket approval of these items for the network. Some of these items, wet sprayed applied cellulose, any type of spray applied foam if it's installed as insulation, refrigerators, replacement water heaters, CFLs, LEDs. These are items that have previously been approved for some grantees, but if you would like to add them to your program, consult your project officer and refer to Attachment 6 of this WPN on how to do that. As you can see, WPN 19-4 contains a number of new updates as well as reminders that will be beneficial to maintaining compliance with regulation, as well as assuring that grantees are turning out the best quality product possible for our clients. There has been a lot of new items that maybe you've not been familiar with previously. If you have questions, please direct those to your project officer of record. Thank you very much for your time.